in Brisbane as the Australian team, led by that famous lock forward Johnny Raper, comes onto the field in front of the Frank Burke stand. Referee for the match this afternoon is Jack Percival. And the New Zealand team, led by James Bond, the 5'8", number 6 for the New Zealanders. The Australian team is Sims at fullback, Rhodes and King on the wings, Greaves and Langlands in the centres, Branson at 5'8", Smith halfback, Raper, lock and captain, Thornett and Coote in the second row, and the front row is Rasmussen, Jones and Wittenberg. New Zealand, captained by James Bond, Elwood the fullback. The wingers are Mincham and Wiggs. Ernie Wiggs, of course, the goal kicker for New Zealand, opposed to Eric Sims, the Australian fullback. Dunn and Schultz in the centres, Bond at 5'8", Clark halfback, Kriletich as the lock forward, Dixon and Lee in the second row, and the front row is Tartner, O'Neill and Smith. Teams moving into position for the third World Cup match at Lang Park before an estimated crowd of 25,000 in fine sunny conditions. Australia to the right of your screen, defending the northern or scoreboard end of the ground, and the Kiwis, led by James Bond, of course, on the left of the screen in white shorts. Stand by, please, for the national anthem. Ready for the kickoff in this third World Championship match in this series. Australia to play New Zealand. Referee for the match, Jack Percival. Australia in the all dark colours, defending the northern end of the ground, and it's James Bond, the centre, who kicks well downfield to the Australians. The second row forward, Thornett, in possession in front of the stand just outside of the Australian 25. And offside New Zealand, a penalty to Australia, 35 yards out from the Australian line. Australia led by Johnny Raper. Australian fullback Eric Sims kicks for touch on the grandstand side, and it's a good kick from Sims, fine touch, 10 yards inside New Zealand territory. There's Billy Smith, the Australian halfback, doubling round in centre field to Raper, Thornett. The Australian second row is tackled 15 yards inside New Zealand territory.
It looks as though James Bond has received a facial injury. I didn't see him in the play there for any great period of time, but he seems to be on one knee and seems to be trouble with his face.
The New Zealand skipper, James Bond, the veteran of the side at 29 years of age. Play has been in progress only less than a minute, just on a minute, and there's no score in this match between Australia and New Zealand at Lang Park. The Australian team is Sims at fullback, the Australian goal-kicking fullback who played in his first match last week against Great Britain, first international match with great success. Rhodes and King on the wings, Greaves and Langlands in the centres, Branson 5'8", and Smith is at halfback. And Bond seems to be all right again as the Australian second rower, Thornett, will play the ball 15 yards inside New Zealand territory as Smith sends a pass across to Branson to Langlands as the New Zealand defenders swarm in. Raper to Smith. 10 yards inside New Zealand territory. Cross to Raper. The switch to Sims, the fullback. Kick well downfield to Elwood, the New Zealand fullback. Takes it nicely on his own line. And it's a 5 yards out from the New Zealand line as New Zealand play the ball back to the front row of Smith. And it's a penalty to New Zealand.
Offside Australia.
And Elwood finds touch just outside of the New Zealand 25. On the terrace side of the field with the second kick out to the halfback Smith. The Clark, the New Zealand halfback Clark. Dixon, second row. Centre field, Branson the tackler. New Zealand 5'8" Bonds is upended. Australian tackler was Coote, wearing number 10 jersey. Goes back to Elwood, standing up close, the fullback. Kick down to the Australian 25, and Sims takes it. Close to the halfway mark, but still inside Australian territory. Long pass out wide to Langlands. A yard short halfway and 5 yards in from touch. Smith. Picked up by Coote, the Australian second rower. And it's Australia in possession, 8 yards inside New Zealand territory. On the terrace side of the field, across to Smith, the halfback to Branson. Langlands following through, was pushed down before he could get across then, but it's gathered by the New Zealand centre Dunn. And running into touch, a good kick from New Zealand, takes play about 15 yards inside Australian territory. Referee for the match is Jack Percival from New Zealand. Wide of the Australian 5'8" Branson, where it's picked up by Langlands. And it's a penalty to New Zealand against Johnny Raper, offside. Australian lock and captain, and it's a pretty easy kick for New Zealand, just outside of the Australian 25, with Wiggs, the winger, coming across, the left winger, Ernie Wiggs, who kicked all of New Zealand's points in the first of the matches in New Zealand, which New Zealand were concerned with against France. 5 out of 5 attempts to Ernie Wiggs, having his first kick at goal, the first kick in this match, as Wiggs comes in. And the flags are up. Play has been in progress for 4 minutes, and New Zealand lead Australia by 2 points to 0. Deep into New Zealand territory, picked up by Mincham, the right winger, and he's bumped into touch by Rasmussen, number 11 for Australia. Australian front row, Rasmussen, Jones and Wittenberg, 11, 12 and 13 in that order. And it's a penalty to New Zealand. Elwood, the fullback, kicks for touch on the terraced side, finds touch on the full. Takes play 15 yards inside Australian territory. Winger Mincham gives it across to the hooker O'Neill, who in turn sends it on to his halfback Clark and knocked it on. Scrum 10 yards, just over 10 yards inside Australian territory. New Zealand leading by 2 points to 0. Billy Smith's ball into the scrum, the Australian halfback, and it's a penalty to Australia.
Yes, a penalty to Australia. The inside foot of the hooker was up for New Zealand. He is to strike with the outside leg. He endeavoured to strike with the inside, and the referee had no hesitation awarding the penalty.
And Australia have found touch deep in New Zealand territory. Sims, the fullback, and take the second kick. On to Raper. Raper to Smith, holding it up and giving it back then to Rasmussen, bursting through. Just short of the New Zealand 25. Smith across to Branson. Branson to Langlands. Over the 25 goes Langlands. And it's only 10 yards out from the New Zealand line. Raper up at dummy half to Branson, to Smith, outside of him to Thornett. Gathered by the fullback Sims as the ball was spilt. And Sims, the Australian fullback, trying hard to get the pass away. 10 yards short of the New Zealand line. It's the third tackle On to Smith, into Branson. Field goal attempt. Racing through comes the Australian winger Rhodes, but it's into touch as Wiggs came across.
In the remaining minutes of the first half, Australian fullback Sims kicked a penalty goal and a field goal, and New Zealand led Australia by 7 points to 4.
Teams back on the field for the second half, and Australia running with the assistance of this fairly strong southwesterly breeze running from the southern end of the ground, which means, of course, that New Zealand in the white shorts will be defending the northern or scoreboard end of the ground at Lang Park. New Zealand are leading by 7 points to 4. Been one change. The Australian 5/8 Branson has been replaced by Fulton, wearing number 14 jersey. Fulton, number 14, the fair-headed Australian 5/8, as Sims drives it straight down centre field for the kick-off. Elwood takes it on his own try line. It was a difficult one to pick up, but he did well, and takes it up towards the New Zealand 25 before Smith tackled him. This is Fulton. Kicks across on the terraced side of the field, rather into the New Zealand 5/8 Tate, I should say, and it's Australia in possession. Fulton, number 14, replacing Branson. Australian fullback was up there in the movement. Wittenberg, number 13, the Australian prop on the New Zealand 25, in front of the post, the third tackle. Rasmussen's up at dummy half for Australia. A field goal attempt by Sims, and it's there. Only 1 point separating the teams. New Zealand leading 7 points to 6. Play has been in progress 1 minute in the second half. Elwood over the Australian 25. Raper had trouble with that one and knocked it on.
Yes, the ball scudded along the deck. Johnny Raper was trying to judge the bounce, but just in front of him it ran 2 or 3 times and he was unfortunate, knocking on.
15 yards out from the Australian line. That's the Australian halfback Billy Smith's ball into the scrum. Referee Jack Percival. Raper behind the scrum, running down the blind side. 20 yards out from the Australian line. To Smith, inside to Thornett, the second rower for Australia, just over the 25 now, with Tartner and Lee, the tacklers, into Smith. Smith to front row, Rasmussen taking it on the burst, but Dixon underneath. 35 yards out from the Australian line, back to Sims, the fullback, right down centre field, over the New Zealand 25, back to the goal post. Elwood, the New Zealand fullback, crosses the 25, following through for the short kick, and nicely gathered Elwood up to the halfway mark, and kicks again, once again following through. Sims trying to get underneath it. The bounce favouring New Zealand for a moment as Coote, the Australian second rower, kicks it into touch.
Well, good play on the part of Elwood. He received the ball right back on his own goal line, ran downfield, put a short kick over, regathered, and then ran to the right-hand touchline of the field near the grandstand side of the field. When he didn't have any room in which to move, he sent a kick long and deep and high, and his forwards were there to regather, but the bounce favoured Australia, who kicked dead.
So it swept right downfield, and its play now is on the Australian try line as Sims drops out down centre field on the halfway mark. Pulled down nicely by Tate, who replaced Bond early in this match. And Tate makes a lot of ground to run it well up towards the Australian 25 onto Clark, and the knock-on has been ruled. A scrum to pack down 35 yards out from the Australian line in centre field, with New Zealand leading Australia 7 points to 6, and New Zealand have scored the only try of the match so far. Centre Dunn has scored that try. New Zealand ball onto Tate in the 5/8 position. Greaves over the top, number 3, the Australian centre. O'Neill out wide, onto Dunn in the centres. Raper, one of the tacklers, and Coote.
Yes, it was it looked as though it was forward, that pass, and was being penalised. It would appear that way. Would that be your interpretation there, Arthur?
Must have been offside.
Offside,
as the penalty was
yes,
awarded.
it was an offside.
And Australia take play inside New Zealand territory by about almost 10 yards as the hooker gives it across to Smith. Smith then to Fulton. Fulton to Rasmussen, bursting through. And then to Greaves, the Australian centre. Back to Fulton, the fair-headed Australian 5'8", who replaced Branson at half-time. Smith in possession. In centre field, the Australians moving better now. Onto Raper. Raper out wide to Coote in the centres, but plenty of defenders there watching Coote. This is more like the Australian attack that was seen. The Australian hooker, Jones, 15 yards out from the New Zealand goal post. Thornett up in the dummy half, back to Coote for the field goal attempt, but it's half knocked, back to Sims I should say, but it's half knocked down as Krilitic came in, and it's over the dead ball line, into touch. New Zealand to drop out from the 25. Rather from their own line, I meant to say. Elwood along the ground, a drop out. Thornett pushes it back to Rhodes, the Australian winger. Rhodes is tackled on the 25 by Wiggs. Smith to Raper, cross to Fulton, not an easy one to pick up, gathered by Greaves. Tate the tackler for New Zealand. On the New Zealand 25, Australia in possession. Rasmussen to Raper, but not allowed to pass the ball in the tackle as he'd hoped. Australian hooker Jones back to Sims. New Zealand stopping that field goal attempt. And the knock-on has been ruled. A scrum to pack down on the New Zealand 25, with New Zealand leading by 7 points to 6 after 6 minutes of play in the second half. Penalty to New Zealand against the Australian hooker, Jones. Play has been in progress for 6 minutes in the second half, and New Zealand lead Australia by 7 points to 6. Shade from the grandstand, the Frank Burke stand covering most of the ground now, as Wiggs, the winger, has been called in to his, I don't know, he's going to kick for touch on the grandstand side, but for a moment it looks as if he's going to have a place kick. Not at goal, surely. It's just outside the New Zealand 25, and he's pointing it across towards the terrace side of the field. Unusual one. Haven't seen this before, but it's always the first time. And he finds touch with it from a place kick. You seen one of those?
First time I've seen one.
First one, Ted? Very interesting one. The second kick from New Zealand as the hooker sends it onto the halfback Clark, then to Tartner, the prop. Along the ground to O'Neill, on to Lee, the second row forward. And it's midway between the Australian 25 and the halfway mark. Wittenberg, the tackler, as Lee sent it back. Clark reversing it onto Tate, the 5'8". A little kick over the heads, and it might be into touch on the full. Yes, it is, and it's back where the kick was taken.
Tate playing a very, very good game for New Zealand. He's in most things, and he's controlling a certain amount of New Zealand's attack out there, doing very well today.
10 yards inside Australian territory. New Zealand leading by 7 points to 6. Play has been in progress for 8 minutes in the second half. Smith's ball in, the Australian halfback. Won by Australia. Out to Fulton, number 14 for Australia, replaced Branson. Raper running from the dummy half over the halfway mark, waiting for Coote, gives it to Coote, that's spilled out of his arms with New Zealand trying to pick it up. Rhodes taking it through at the toe, but the knock-on has been ruled. Referee Jack Percival ordering a scrum to pack down just outside of the New Zealand 25, with New Zealand leading 7 points to 6. Clark's ball in. Won by New Zealand, up on the blind side. Clark is caught by Raper. New Zealand midway between 25 and the halfway mark. New Zealand territory. Across to Tate, the 5'8". Lobs it across, then to Schultz. Schultz out wide to Dunn. And the tackler for Australia is Greaves, number 3. Hooker, O'Neill, New Zealand. Wittenberg, one of the Australian tacklers, with Greaves in there as well. New Zealand kicking downfield over the halfway mark. Rhodes watching it. Sims, the Australian fullback, a difficult one to pick up. And the knock-on ruled. Very hard one for a fullback to gather, the way that bounce was going to.
Yes, very difficult one. It appeared as though he did call for the ball. Rhodes looked as though he was going to attempt to retrieve it, but it appeared from here as though the fullback had said mine.
A scrum just outside of the Australian 25, New Zealand leading 7 points to 6. And Fulton, the Australian 5/8, sends it back to Sims, standing up close, the Australian fullback. Just outside of the Australian 25, Rhodes up in the dummy half position to Raper. Lee, one of the tacklers, 35 yards out from the Australian line to Billy Smith, then to Fulton, out to second row Coote. And he's broken through the tackles again. Coote over the halfway mark, trying terrific speed as usual, over the 25, Coote flying for the corner, trying to beat a tackle and dives, and Coote has scored in the corner. A beautiful try. A 75-yard try to Coote, the first try for Australia, who now take the lead. 9 points to 7 with the kick to come from the touchline. Ted Berenkamp.
Yes, well, a brilliant try by Coote. We've heard a lot about his performances down south. We've heard a lot about his performances in England, and now today we're able to see them, and certainly he has not been overrated. He took the pass in the centre position, standing out in the ruck. After 2 or 3 passes along the back line from Smith, and then on to, I think Raper was in there. We saw Coote cutting in deep behind the defensive forwards of New Zealand and in front of their backs, and cutting diagonally across field to the corner flag. His pace is fantastic. This man's acceleration is out of the ordinary.
And it's waved away, the attempted conversion by Sims. So Australia lead by 9 points to 7. And play has been in progress for 11 minutes in the second half. Certainly a wonderful try from Coote from the Australian 25. The ball being tossed across from Elwood to the New Zealand halfback Clark for the kick-off. Both sides have scored 1 try, 1 to Coote and 1 to Dunn to New Zealand. Kick downfield, the Australian fullback Sims runs it up to the 25 and over the 25, and a great run from Sims. Up to the halfway mark. Here's Smith, back inside to Fulton, and it's Fulton who's caught, not far from the New Zealand 25. Raper very quickly moving it on, up to Thornett. Thornett, then to Greaves, Australian centre. Raper driving the Australian team on, realising that they can take advantage of the situation with Australia on the move onto Fulton. Just outside of the New Zealand 25. Raper calling for the ball, but went back to Sims. It looked as if it was going to Raper. Sims, no chance of a field goal to Thornett. Thornett, the Australian hooker, sends it out to Greaves onto Rhodes on the wing. Brings the crowd to their toes, almost into touch, but got it back to Greaves. Onto Rasmussen, testing the defence now. Greaves, number 3, over the 25, and here goes Greaves. He's veering back to the corner, sends the pass back inside. The Australian hooker dived over. Jones has scored the second try in a matter of minutes. And Australia go to a lead of 12 points to 7 after 12 minutes of play, coming up to 13 minutes in the second half.
Well, it will take a big effort on the part of New Zealand to get really back into this game. Coote's run and try demoralised New Zealand, showed a weakness in their defence, and Australia were very, very quick to follow this breach up very, very quickly. We saw them apply pressure, the first we've seen throughout this game, and a try resulted as a result of this pressure being applied on New Zealand. The Australian attack looking very, very good indeed at this stage. The New Zealand defence looking a little bit sick at the moment.
Now Sims attempting the conversion, 10 yards in from touch on the terrace side and just outside the 25 by about 2 yards. Australia leading 12-7. Sims in for the kick, and it looks good. The flags are up. Australia 14, New Zealand 7, and play in progress almost 15 minutes in the second half. New Zealand hooker O'Neill is sitting on the ground injured back near the New Zealand try line. Ambulance attendant appears to be looking at a leg injury.
Yes, it appears to be the back of the thigh.
Australia have scored 2 tries to 1, tries by Coote and Jones in the last few minutes of play. The New Zealand try scored by Dunn in the 11th minute of the first half. The penalties at half-time favoured New Zealand 10-8. Penalties now 11-9 to New Zealand, and the scrums favouring Australia 9-6. 9-6 the scrums are favouring Australia. O'Neill moving back into position, still limping slightly, as Clark, the New Zealand halfback, has it set. Rasmussen, 12 yards inside Australian territory, back to Wittenberg, onto Thornett, over the halfway mark. A few yards inside New Zealand territory, Australian hooker sends it to Smith, and it's a penalty, Australia. Offside play, Clark, the New Zealand halfback. Sims placing this one, it's right in centre field and on the 10-yard mark in New Zealand territory. A 45-yard kick in front, and he'll have the assistance of some breeze behind him, which will be partly blowing across the flight of the ball. But I don't think it will affect the flight of the ball greatly from this end of the field, the northern end. There's the kick from Sims, and he's raised the flags. Australia have gone to a lead of 16 points to 7, and play has been in progress for just over 15 minutes in the second half. A kick from New Zealand runs into touch, 12 yards inside Australian territory, as Elwood kicked off. Smith's ball to the scrum. Australia playing 5/8 Fulton in the second half, replacing Branson. That's Fulton giving it back to Smith to go back into the scrum again. Penalty to New Zealand.
Loose arm.
New Zealand winger Ernie Wiggs is going to take a kick at goal. This is midway between the halfway and the 25, and not far from centre field, only a few yards to the right, over towards the grandstand side. A half-time score, and New Zealand led Australia 7-4. Australia have the assistance of the southwesterly breeze in the second half. Wiggs attempts a penalty kick at goal. It's taken by Sims, the Australian fullback, just to the right of the uprights. A very nice kick from Sims, but almost ran into touch. Dunn, the New Zealand centre, is tackled on the halfway mark by Greaves. Wiggs, the winger, in there as it's on to Lee, the second row, number 12 for New Zealand. Plenty of tacklers in there, including the Australian halfback. to Clark, Clark to Dixon, the second row forward, then to Krilitic, the lock. Krilitic sends it back to Schultz, the centre. Following through from the kick, the Australian winger King. It didn't suit him. Gathered very nicely by Mincham, the winger. King tackled him. Mincham apparently foot into touch. It was very close. The scrum 15 yards out from the Australian line, with Australia leading by 16 points to 7. And it's the Australian ball, won by Smith. Shot it away to King, racing down the touchline over the halfway mark, but Elwood wraps him up and into touch, 3 yards inside Australian territory. Elwood took him ball and all.
Yes, a very good blindside play there on the part of Australia. Not very good defence from the lock forward of New Zealand.
Just inside New Zealand territory. King certainly showed some speed. As Smith has it for Australia. Once again the blind side onto King again. There's better cover on the blind side on that occasion. 10 yards inside New Zealand territory as Raper sends his pass to Smith to Fulton. Fulton onto Langlands, bursting through on the New Zealand 25 with Langlands to play it back for Australia. Raper across to Wittenberg. Wittenberg to Sims. Knocked it on. Close on 20 minutes of play in the second half, and Australia are leading New Zealand by 16 points to 7. Smith's Clark's ball into the scrum, the New Zealand halfback. There's an Australian ball onto Raper, the Australian lock to Fulton. Very nearly through, 10 yards out from the New Zealand try line as Raper sends the pass out to Smith, holds it up for a moment, switches play back across to Wittenberg to Rhodes, and Rhodes is over. It's the third Australian try, all in this half, and Australia go to a lead of 19 points to 7.
Yes, well, that's Rhodes' first try for Australia, and I'm pretty sure that it won't be his last. He's a brilliant player. He's possibly winded rather severely at the moment, but I've no doubt that he'll be on his feet again very shortly. This fellow is an electrifying type of player. He went to Sydney last year and set Sydney alight with his brilliant running and handling.
Only this season, really, Ted.
That's right, this season.
Played with Brisbane West all of last year. He's only 20 years of age. Australian tries have been scored in the 11th, 13th and 20th minutes. Sims attempting the conversion, 2 or 3 yards in from touch and just outside of the 25. Australia leading 19-7, 20 minutes of play, the second half. And there's a kick, a lovely kick from Sims. Up go the flags. And it's 21-7. Elwood kicks downfield. Thornett, the Australian second rower, tackled 10 yards inside Australian territory. The pass on to Rasmussen on the halfway mark. The Australian prop, Elton Rasmussen. Rapers in the dummy half position, then to Smith, to Fulton, out to Greaves, and Greaves sees the gap. Props looking for support and decides to come back this side. Great speed, Greaves. I think he expected to have support there at that moment. Onto Fulton, the Australian 5/8. Only 10 yards out from the New Zealand line. As Fulton plays it back, Rapers up there as usual to Smith. Then to Coote, and Coote gave it away to King when he could have put it down himself, surely. And the Australian winger King has scored Australia's 4th try and they made it look so easy on that occasion.
Yes, it's starting to come easy now, and the New Zealand defence is completely shot and riddled. There doesn't seem to be any organised defence out there. It's a matter of making the first break. Australian defence is not taking any credit away from the Australian defence. It's very, very good, but I do feel it's made to look a lot better than possibly it could be.
Now, that's the 4th Australian try in 11 minutes in the second half. Australia 24, New Zealand 7, as Sims attempts this kick from once again out on the touchline. And it's on the other side of the field this time, in front of the Frank Burke stand. The capacity of 10,000, just on 10,000 on the western side of the ground. It's falling short and now it's there. Thought just skimmed across the bar. This angle, it looked as if it was just a fraction short, but Sims made it again, and it's 26-7. "22 minutes of play in the second half. 18 minutes remaining. Elwood, New Zealand fullback, kicks across. Australian second rower Thornett pulls it down. But it's Wittenberg who finished with it. Raper to Thornett this time. Up towards the halfway mark to Smith, to Fulton. He's a smart moving young player we haven't seen in Brisbane before. Smith makes it look easy the way he pulls passes into Raper. Inside to Langlands. Langlands appeared to be limping then as he was running with the ball, the 4th tackle. New Zealand ball, Clark, the halfback, back inside to Elwood, fullback, right up with the movement, but it's an Australian ball as Fulton, the 5'8", wearing number 14 jersey, the Australian hooker Jones, sends his pass away to Smith, then to Langlands, with a bandage on his right knee. Midway between the New Zealand 25 and the halfway mark, Australia in possession. Here's Raper again. On to Thornett. Machinery's working now, but it's dropped by Fulton. Australia lucky to retain possession if they can get that, but picked up by New Zealand. 12 yards inside New Zealand territory. Out to Wiggs on the left wing. He's tackled 5 yards short of halfway by Rhodes. Tate sends that long floating pass, goes to nowhere. Gathered by Lee, the second row forward, then to Schultz in the centres, over the halfway mark, inside to Wiggs, to Mincham. Fulton the tackler. It's Dunn who actually plays it back to Clark. And the hooker O'Neill, that left-footed stab kick, finds touch, grubber kick, 20 yards out from the Australian line. Australia leading by 26 points to 7. It's a penalty to Australia. Referee signal a little bit difficult to see against the scrum in the shadows of the stand, covering most of the ground now. Sims kicking for touch on the grandstand side. Finds touch midway between the 25 and the halfway mark. The second kick is given to Smith, the Australian halfback. To Fulton, back to Smith, on to Langlands, to Smith, dropped, and New Zealand ball. Not quite, but Fulton, it's the knock-on ruled. 35 yards out from the Australian line. Australia leading by 26 points to 7. Play has been in progress for 27 minutes in the second half. Clark, the New Zealand halfback, on to Schultz, who's tackled by Coote. Close to the Australian 25, New Zealand. Dixon, the second row forward. to his winger Mincham, very nearly into touch on the Australian 25. Clark, the half-back to Schultz, knocks it on. Scrum to pack down, 35 yards out from the Australian line, and Jones, the Australian hooker, is sitting on the ground on the 25, injured. Ambulance attendant has been called onto the ground. About 13 minutes of play remaining, and Australia lead New Zealand by 26 points to 7. Australia have scored 4 tries, and they were scored in a period of 11 minutes between the 11th and 22nd minutes of the second half.
Yes, well, that was the period when the game really came alive with Australia in that 11th minute. A tremendous burst by Ron Coote scoring in the corner, and since then it's been all Australia. A brilliant attack, a jaded New Zealand defence. A combination of both shows the score at Australia, 26 points to New Zealand 7.
Just outside of the Australian 25, Smith's ball for Australia to Fulton, to Langlands. And Graham Langlands obviously being worried by that right knee at this stage, onto Fulton. On the halfway mark, Raper runs from dummy half, back to Fulton again. Billy Smith didn't expect that one. Thornett, the second row forward, a bad pass out to Rhodes on the wing, and it's into touch about 10 yards short of the New Zealand 25. A bit of scrappy play then from the Australians.
Yes, very scrappy. I feel they're starting to relax a little, knowing that the game, or the result of the game, is sewn up.
New Zealand halfback Clark's ball into the scrum. New Zealand ball, Clark. Pass away then to Elwood, getting into the movement out to Wiggs. Nearly into touch. Not quite. Across to Tate, the 5'8", then to Dixon, number 11, to Lee, the other second rower. Wittenberg, the tackler, with another Australian player, was Smith. This is Tate again, out on the grandstand side, the fullback up to the movement, onto Dunn. And the Australian tackler was Langlands. New Zealand, Tartner, lob to Tate. Gathers it this time, Tate. Very slow passing across to Clark. Back inside then to Kriletich, the lock. Onto Clark. Here's a chance for New Zealand to score as it comes onto Wiggs, but it's Australian ball. Greaves, the Australian centre, into touch. 35 yards out from the Australian line as Schultz tackled the Australian centre, Greaves, when New Zealand looked a strong chance to score in the corner a moment ago. The ball was dropped by Wiggs and Greaves snapped it up. Australia leading by 26 points to 7, 29 minutes of play in the second half. 11 minutes of play remaining. Australia 26-7, Smith's ball into the scrum. Sims, the fullback, into that blindside movement. Smith, the Australian halfback, 35 yards out from the Australian line. Raper's up at the dummy half position to give it to Thornett. Thornett then is a difficult one for Rasmussen to pick up, or to pull down. On the 10-yard mark, almost inside Australian territory in centre field. Smith's ball in. It's a New Zealand ball from the scrum as Clark sends it to Schultz, the inside centre. Lee kicks across on the terraced side. Sims following it through. The Australian fullback beats Dunn, but is picked up by Wiggs, number 5, the left winger for New Zealand. Rhodes sends his pass back to Greaves. Once again, Wiggs moves in for the tackle with support from Smith, the prop. This is Smith, the Australian halfback. Wittenberg sees the gap, and away goes Big John up to the halfway mark, showing surprising speed. Sends it on to Fulton, the Australian 5'8". King's waiting for the pass. Fulton tosses it across, and King will score. And that looked so easy. I thought Fulton was going in himself then, Ted.
Yes, it looked very much as though he was. The man that he was trying to swing away from his wicket came in to cover Fulton. Fulton saw what was happening and threw an overhanded basketball pass to the unmarked King to go to touchdown.
That's King's second try in the last 9 minutes and Australia's fifth try. Australia go to a lead of 29 points to 7.
Well, big John Wittenberg certainly split the New Zealand defence, what there was of it, in that terrific run.
He showed great speed once he broke clear. Sims attempting the conversion. This is an easier one. The last couple of conversions have been from out near the touchline, but this one's about 15 yards in on the grandstand side of the field, 15 to 18 yards in from touch. Australia leading 29-7, 8 minutes of play remaining. And he's done it again. That's 6 goals to Sims and 2 penalty goals for a total of 18 points, or 16 points. 8 goals all told, 4 conversions, 2 penalty goals and 2 field goals. Roger Tate, wearing number 1 for New Zealand, replaced Bond in the first half, kicks off. Rasmussen over the halfway mark, the Australian forwards being allowed to run at will in this last 5 minutes or so. Wittenberg's up behind Rasmussen, 35 yards out from the New Zealand line to Thornett. Close to the New Zealand 25. Smith, the Australian, on to Coote. And racing through came Langlands, but it's a penalty to New Zealand. Langlands apparently ruled offside. Australia 31, New Zealand 7, with 7 minutes of play remaining. And the kick from New Zealand found touch. Elwood, the fullback, found touch inside Australian territory by a yard or so as the second kick is taken onto halfback Clark, into Tate. Tate to Smith, the front row forward, wearing number 10 jersey. And Wittenberg, who's been doing a lot of heavy tackling in this match today, was one of the tacklers. Lobbed out to Wiggs on the wing, the left winger for New Zealand. A lovely tackle from Sims, got right underneath him, 10 yards out from the corner. New Zealand winger to play it back. Dunn's up at dummy half. It's across to Kriletich, the lock, then to Dixon, the second rower. Schultz, number 4, New Zealand centre, managed to get his pass away rather miraculously. New Zealand second row, Lee to Clark. New Zealand only about 5 or 6 yards out from the Australian line. As Tartner sent it back to the half-back to Schultz, has lost it, gathered again by Clark, but he was ruled offside, Clark, when he picked it up. And there's a player injured, an Australian player, can't quite see who it is, possibly Fulton. You can't see him anywhere. Australia are leading by 31 points to 7, just over 5 minutes of play remaining. Appears to be the Australian 5/8, Fulton. Well, it seems to be all over bar the shouting this match, Sid.
Yes, I think it is, Arthur. It's amazing just how a team who defended as strongly as New Zealand did in the first 40 minutes of play could completely disintegrate in the second half in the manner that they have shown today.
Well, Fulton seems all right again. And Australia will take the penalty awarded to them for offside play by Clark just before the injury. And Sims finds touch just outside of the Australian 25. Australia 31, New Zealand 7 with 5 minutes of play remaining. Australian ball to Raper. Raper doubling around. It's hard to see where it was going. Smith eventually. The Australian halfback tackled by Dixon. And to Raper. Raper, back to Lee, to the Australian prop, the forward it was, Jones. Taken through at the toe by O'Neill, the New Zealand hooker. But the referee is calling play back to the 25, blown his whistle, which we didn't hear and most of the players didn't hear in that toe the ball episode. The scrum to pack down just outside of the Australian 25 with 4 minutes of play remaining. Australia leading 31-7.
Very wide blind.
Smith to Raper. It's a penalty.
Not retiring.
And the New Zealand fullback, Elwood, is about to take the ball, is he? Yes. Elwood is going to kick for touch. Not worrying about goal kicking at this stage of the game and with the scoreboard in the condition it is. And Elwood finds touch about 5 yards out from the Australian line. The second kick to New Zealand as it comes under Kriletich and then to the halfback Clark. Second rower, or rather prop Smith. Pulled down a couple of yards out by Raper. Schultz up a dummy half, tries to dive over and he's just about over. Can he get the ball down? The New Zealand centre, Schultz.
It's a try.
A try to Schultz. Australian player underneath him. He had difficulty in getting the ball down, Schultz, but eventually he did so. And that's the second try to New Zealand. Previous one was scored by Dunn in the 11th minute of the first half. Australia 31, New Zealand 10. The 3 minutes of play remaining as Ernie Wiggs, the New Zealand winger, will attempt the conversion. It's a very easy one in front and he takes no risks with that one, no doubt either. $31 points to 12. Two minutes of play remaining as Australia will kick off. Halfback Smith places the ball and it's Langlands who kicks well downfield. Elwood runs it up and follows it through with the kick. King couldn't hold that one, gathered by New Zealand halfback Clark, spinning around in the tackle to Tate. Tate to Schultz. Over the halfway mark goes Schultz. There's some nice attack from New Zealand. Out to Dunn in the centres. And gathered by Wiggs as it came back. Still play on. Here's a chance for New Zealand. Tate, rather Clark, dodging and weaving the halfback. And New Zealand has swept play right upfield to within 10 yards of the Australian line. Locke sends it across to Tate. Tate to Lee, the second row forward, who got it on to Dixon. Back to Lee again, and Lee running strongly. He's just about scoring. Lee, and it's lost then, as Dunn, it appeared to be, tried to take the ball.
And King came across and crashed him as he was about to receive it, knocked the ball out of his hands completely.
It was either Dunn or Mincham. I think it was possibly Mincham, the winger. Sure. Wiggs, or rather Sims for Australia, kicks, drops out in the 25. Across to Tate, just inside New Zealand territory. Smith in for the tackle on the halfway mark in centre field. Full time coming up in a minute. New Zealand kick across on the terraced side, but it's out on the full. So that means a scrum back in New Zealand territory. Pretty close to halfway. Australia have scored 5 tries to 2. Australian tries. King has scored 2. Coote, Jones and Rhodes 1 each. A New Zealand ball as Dunn tries to pick it up. No knock on. Dunn to play it back for New Zealand. Out to Elwood, it's the fullback. It's the Australian ball with King trying to pick it up. The Australian winger is the full-time hooter sounds. And it's all over. Australia have defeated New Zealand by 31 points to 12, scoring 5 tries to 2. Australian tries, King 2, Coote, Jones and Rhodes 1 each. New Zealand tries by Dunn and Schultz. Australian goals, Sims kicked 4 conversions, 2 penalty goals and 2 field goals for a personal tally of 16. And for New Zealand, Wiggs kicked a conversion and 2 penalty goals. The penalties were awarded to New Zealand, 14-12, and the scrums were won by Australia.